Yes, hello. My name is Søren Møller, and I would like to talk to you about an analogy between a group of musicians and a team of engineering students. Now, a group of musicians, that is a fairly broad category. So, to make this analogy a little bit more specific and easier to handle, what I'm going to look at is a group of musicians working on their own original material to make it more comparable to a team of engineering students working on a project. So this could be any genre of music, but as long as we're talking about a smaller group of people. But to make the idea more concrete, let's talk about a rock band. So why work on this analogy? Well, first of all, I should say that by analogy, I understand an explicit comparison of two, in practice, normally unrelated entities or situations, which serve to say something about at least one of the two compared entities or situations. Analogies in general, I think, can be problematic because they always hide certain aspects of what they are supposed to say something about and highlight others. But where I think there is a pedagogical potential is if we actually try to discuss the analogy with a view to identifying the differences between the two compared entities. And this is also why the title of the paper exactly focuses on the differences. So, but why is this interesting? An interesting analogy? Well, first of all, it's actually not a new thing to use music ensembles as a model for looking at coordination in general. It has been frequently used in management workshops throughout several decades as a place where business leaders can watch and learn from the way, for instance, a choir or a string quartet and so on is being led. But from a personal point of view, as a person who teaches problem-based learning for 5 different engineering programs in the same course at Aalborg University in Esbjerg, I see a need for, I often need some examples that can help students understand the nature of engineering as such, and especially engineering teamwork, irrespective of their area of specialization. So I would like people to be able to zoom in on what is it that makes me an engineer and not just a chemical engineer, because it's very easy to explain from the specific things that you're doing in your program what your profession is, but what does it really mean to be an engineer? And I think this analogy might be able to help with that. I also think there are some actual insights that may be of benefit to or an inspiration for engineering teams in general, but more about that a little bit later. There's also the more incidental reason for this topic that I personally have a foot in both sides of the analogy. Back in my PhD dissertation, which was in philosophy, by the way, from 2010, I discussed some different theoretical models for what is going on in a music performance in terms of interpersonal coordination. And now here, 9 years later, as I said, I'm teaching problem-based learning for first-year students in engineering. It's a long route between those two points that I'm not going to recount here. But I've had to generalize from my previous experiences in research on coordination. So thus it's been relevant for me to look at, okay, so what is generalizable from this example, from the music ensemble, and what is specific to the given context of coordination. So there are many similarities between a rock band and a team of engineering students. So just to set up this a little bit, what I'm talking about here is a rock band consisting of maybe 3 to 6 members that are composing their own material. And on the other side of the analogy, we're looking at a team of engineering students of, say, 3 to 6 students working on a project of their own choice. There are many forms of, if we look at the rock band and music ensembles in general, there are many types of organization possible, ranging from just having one leader to having a true collaboration between everyone involved. And the same thing holds for the engineering team. There could also be several types of power structures in a small group of people. If we look at the way that the rock band works, for instance, rehearsing a new tune or working on studio performance or studio recording, there are often these swift moves between working silently and having ad hoc conversations about what to do next. And, well, the same thing holds in the project group of engineering students. There are also these swift changes from being in flow, working on something, to discussing and back again. In terms of the coordination process itself, if you're coordinating with other people on a practical task, for instance, for the rock band, well, there's this, in the music performance, there's a coordination process that's dependent on a mixture of mutual expectations, like what are the others likely to do in this kind of situation, your personal goals for what you want the performance to sound like, and some reasoning about what goals the other people might have in this particular situation. And the same thing kind of holds for the project group in a team of engineering students. There's also a coordination process dependent on what people expect of each other. Of course, there's also regular communication when possible that can aid the coordination process. But enough about the similarities. This was just to make it a little bit more plausible to look at this analogy in the first place. What I'm interested in here is to look at the differences, because it's the differences that help us actually learn something. And one place where I think there is a difference is with respect to knowledge management in these different kinds of teams. And if we start on the side of the team of engineering students, knowledge management, at least at Aalborg University in Esbjerg, where I'm employed, it consists in setting up, for instance, learning goals for a project in a learning contract, and then planning accordingly, then documenting your process and results, writing down what happened when, and when did we change the plan and such. And at the end of the project, also writing a process analysis, analyzing, okay, what could we do better next time? What have we actually learned relative to our learning contract and so on. So that's basically the knowledge management going on there. The tacit dimension, however, of the practical experience, which is very much part of an engineer's work, there might be lots of practical work, is something that if you asked the students, they would acknowledge it. Yeah, sure, we did some practical work in the laboratory, or we worked together on a model or whatever, but it's not dealt with in a systematic manner. And that includes, being in flow, working on something. There's a lot of tacit knowledge embedded in that, but it's not something that the engineering students deal with when they manage what they have learned in a project. However, if we look at the rock band and actually music ensembles in general, or soloist contexts for that matter in music, there are actually accepted procedures for handling tacit knowledge, such as, for instance, learning by demonstration. Looking at someone else doing something and then repeating it. There could be, for instance, metaphorical nudging towards a certain kind of expression. So, for instance, I heard musician Stephen Wilson talk about a particular guitar solo or a particular guitar passage in a song where he had asked the guitarist to play it like a person lost in the woods or something like that, because in order to push him towards a certain kind of expression. So there, the language, is not actually explaining what's happening, but it's kind of pushing people towards a certain kind of action. And also, if we look at the performance itself, a lot of the what's going on in people's minds and going on in the specific music performance is tacit. But there are procedures for discussing what happened in the performance after the performance. Of course, you do that. You discuss, okay, well, you were a little bit behind me at that point, so you had to come a little bit sooner after that bar, and so on. So all in all, there are procedures for handling tacit knowledge in a music ensemble. The full paper offers a slightly more detailed discussion of this topic, but I'd like to make time for discussing what I think is perhaps one of the most interesting differences between the music ensemble, or between the rock band and the team of engineering students, and that relates to the creative process. If we start with the engineering team here, this is a model that we provide the students with as a tool for their problem analysis. So we ask people to start with formulating the problem that they're working on, and then considering what is it that constitutes the problem, why is it a problem, where, and also when is the problem relevant or present, so the context of the problem, who are the stakeholders for this problem, and also how can the problem be solved, so some different solution schemes for that. In Danish, all these 6 words begin with the letter H, so we call it the 6H diagram, but in English I have to settle for 6W diagram, even though how doesn't technically begin with the W, but it ends with 1, so there you are. But if we take this model, so this is kind of the way that the engineering students are prompted to work. But if we take this model and then transfer that to the rock band, well, what do we have at the center of the creative process? Well, we have some idea of a new piece of music that the group is working on. So the questions here are then, well, what is the piece like notes, rhythms, whatever is included in it. Why are we working on this? And why is this important to have this particular structure? Where and also when should we play this or record this or release this? There's some logistics in that, and also some strategic things with in terms of marketing the piece of music afterwards. Who should it appeal to, and who should play it for that matter? So basically, kind of the stakeholders of the piece of music, you could say. And how should the performance or recording be carried out? So there can be some practical issues in that matter. However, the problem is that as opposed to the problem-based idea generation of the engineering students, in the rock band, there could be that there's someone who has a rough idea of what the piece of music should be and how these 6 questions should be answered. And it could be difficult for that person to argue for why this is so. So there could be some conflicts here in that a person might have a very clear vision for what this should sound like, and can't really explain to the others why he thinks this is the case. There are, of course, also the other situation where there's actually nothing in the middle of this creative process, but you start by, you have a collaborative process in the group of musicians, but you actually start by answering all these questions, and then gradually the piece of music emerges by looking at, okay, what rhythms do we want to include, what instruments, etc., and so on. But in the situation where we actually have a rough idea of what we want to do, and we're trying to unfold the creative process, there is a problem in the rock band and in many composing music ensembles with the ownership of this process or the authority of what is the right questions to these. What are the right answers to these questions? Whereas in a team of engineering students, I mean, there you have the possibility of negotiation of these different questions, because the problem is formalized. The center of the creative process is formalized. Of course, speaking from experience, there can also be people in a team of engineering students who have hobby horses that they can't really let go of and have difficulties arguing for, but it's less commonly accepted that the understanding itself of what the group is working on is something tacit. So you could say that because of this acceptance of tacit knowledge in context of, and handling tacit knowledge is something that you work with in a rock band, there's also an acceptance of well, it's okay that we can't explain exactly why this should sound like this and this, but that presents a problem for having a true democratic collaboration in the rock band, or can present it. So, to sum this up, an analogy between a rock band and a team of engineering students, and more importantly, a critical examination thereof, is something that could help us showcase the generalizable traits of teamwork, such as the mechanisms of interpersonal coordination and the various ways work can be organized. It can give some engineering students some inspiration for how to handle tacit knowledge as part of knowledge management in general. And it can also help highlight, and that was my point here at the end, highlight the importance of a formally characterized problem at the center of the ideation process in engineering, and that a truly democratic collaboration or collaborative decision process is dependent on a mutual understanding of this formalized problem. So, for more detailed discussion of all these topics, I steer you towards the full paper. But thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Søren. We have 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Søren. I'm never going to think about rock bands and engineering design in the same way. But I'm wondering, when you use this with students, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you
we'll use it. It's early days, but yeah.
Because I mean, when I'm thinking, you know, I guess like if you're using it with students and you're illustrating with video and music and all the rest of it, well, I'd be interested to see how it works with students, but also whether that would sort of raise things with the colleagues in the next room or whatever. You know?
Yeah.
Rock music in your engineering design.
Yeah, actually, one thing that I actually really wanted to have done before this presentation is get in contact with. I have some old research network colleagues at the Academy of Music of Southern Denmark, which has one of its campuses in Esbjerg, where I teach. And I actually wanted to get in contact with them to set up some workshops, because I actually think it could be interesting to have workshops with music ensembles and engineering students to kind of to just have these kind of discussions of what can we actually learn from each other. Because there's also, in terms of, that's kind of a side note, but in terms of the demands for music education in Denmark, it's becoming very much aligned with university educations in general. So there are some demands for being able to generalize also from the specific things that you've learned. That it could be a route to go down. But again, it's early days, and I haven't actually sat down with people from the academy yet. But yeah.
Yeah, kind of an interesting comparison. I was wondering about the question of trust.
Mm-hmm.
So trust is really important in a team, for a team to work.
Yeah.
And in a rock band, you really need to trust that it's going to, the sound's going to come together, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered if that's an element that you brought up or discussed in connection with engineering teams.
So your question is whether the analogy can learn us anything about the issue of trust as such, or yeah.
Ways of, I mean, this is the thing that's important. How do we get students, how can they trust each other to deliver?
Yeah,
And is there something that we can take from the rock band analogy in terms of trust?
It's a good point, and I think the quick answer is yes, because I think there are, if you start considering what a rock band does in a music performance and such, everyone has to be invested in what's happening. So you have to have you have to trust that everyone is going to play their part in this. So that is actually, I mean, and that can't be any other way in a rock band. Whereas in a project group, you often see that, especially I'm teaching first semester students, so there is some degree of dropout within the first month or two. So there are often some groups that start out having to collaborate, and then suddenly they're one or two men down. So there can be some actual issues getting a team spirit in the group. So yeah, very good point. Yeah.
Directly related to that, I guess I was thinking of one disanalogy you didn't mention, which is that bands must and always do practice, and engineering teams don't. In the same way.
Yeah. Of course, I mean, the practice. I mean, of course, I mean it's an analogy. It's not a spot on model, you know. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a different element here of rehearsing the same actions over and over again. Yeah.
So if you do a personality evaluation like a Myers-Briggs or something like that, are musicians often characterized differently than scientists, engineers, mathematicians? If you do some of those kinds of studies of intrinsic personality attributes, that are they different?
I haven't, to be honest, I haven't seen any formalized discussions of it. I mean, if I speak from my own intentions, I think now, I mean, natural sciences and technological education is two different things. I mean, if you look at, for me, engineering is very much, at least if people are actually working within a problem-based model, I think it's very much a creative process. And as such, I think there are actually a lot of similarities in the way people think. But there are, or in people's personalities. But of course, I mean, there are some differences in the kind of answers broadly understood that you're looking for. I mean, for musicians, it's because there is this large tacit component of what people are doing. What people are looking for is auditive things that they don't necessarily need to explain formally, whereas for engineers, they're looking for concrete solutions that they can actually detail verbally. So there are, of course, some differences in the kinds of things that you prefer to work with. But in terms of the creative process, I think there are quite a lot of similarities.
Very interesting presentation. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.
We're proceeding to the last